I'm JJ Perez with Inside Runner Sports. That's Greg Luca with the San Antonio Express News. We are coming to you via Zoom today to wrap up UTSA's 41-20 loss to Texas. Greg, a kind of landmark game for the Roadrunners in the fact that it was the first time they've ever played Texas. It was a relatively competitive game till kind of the end. And, UTSA had a pretty good showing. Well, what did you think of the game?
Yeah, I think the part I'm going to remember the most is the surprise onside kick into the 35-yard touchdown from Brendan Brady to Zachary Franklin, and just the feeling when UTSA went up 17-7, and you could sense it on the sideline with just looking at them, and they talked all about it after the game of just what the energy was like and how much they sort of believed in that moment that they could get this done. But I think over time, and we can get into some of the penalties and some of the mistakes and things like that, but I think as much as UTSA and even some of the fans kind of want to beat the Roadrunners up for how this played out, I think in a lot of ways, we just saw that Texas is the team with some superior talent and depth and the home field advantage and all the things that play into them being able to hang with Alabama that we saw show out against UTSA and how their run game eventually took over. So I don't think the Roadrunners have too much to hang their heads about aside from the injury situation, which I'm sure we'll break down a bit later too. So generally, yeah, I would say it was a pretty positive showing. Did you come away feeling encouraged?
Yeah, that series of plays, those I mean, you have Brendan Brady scoring a rushing touchdown, then the surprise onside kick, and then that the double pass touchdown. I'd say that sequence might be one of the more exciting moments in UTSA history, just because of the shocking nature of what was happening at the time. And you look at some of the other key plays in the game, and let's, I guess, jump there. Frank Harris's pass is intercepted for a touchdown later in the game. Then you have a dropped fourth down conversion by Zachary Franklin. And to me, those were the two big moments that turned the game against the Roadrunners.
Yeah, I think if you want to go, removing penalties, just purely miscues, those are the ones that stand out. There was a couple of potential deep connections, or at least one I remember to Clark that Frank could have hit and maybe underthrew him a little bit, and it actually still went through DeCorian's hands, and so he had a shot at that too. But generally, yeah, I think the two you highlighted are the big ones. The first time Texas took a 2-score lead was that play at the end of the third quarter on the interception return for a touchdown. And, there were times before that where it felt like Texas had the momentum, as you like to say. But the thing about watching UTSA over the years is every time you feel like the other team gets something going and is one or two plays away from kind of putting the lights out on the game, UTSA just drives like nothing happened. They have this sort of poise that they don't really seem fazed by the momentum on their offense. They're able to just continue to go down the field and make a scoring drive where you think, oh, this game might be over. Like it was the same thing against Army. There was times where once Army goes up 14, a lot of teams are going to wilt in that spot. And that's just not how UTSA is. They always have an answer, at least offensively. So it seemed like that was another point where, down 24-20 at that stage of the game, that they could potentially go down and drive and take a lead, and then it might just come down to who has the ball last. And imagine how the crazy that is to say about considering how the outcome turned out, and just to be at an opponent like Texas and be able to have that kind of an outcome in play. So that was an absolute killer. And then, even if they get that conversion to Zachary, they still are going to have to cut it to one score and then get another one. But it was just sort of underscored how costly certain mistakes can be, and how strange that particular scenario was, because it was a mirror image of the play against Houston, where he dropped the same pass, kind of, I think it was about the same part of the field, and it was another 4th and 1. And you just don't expect that from him, because he was so sure-handed last week against Army, and I don't recall any kind of issues with drops. Yesterday, there was that play in the back of the end zone that he could have made, but that would have been a pretty remarkable catch if he had come up with it. So I don't want to knock him for that one. And it just seemed like, he had solved whatever problems might have been nagging him in the opener, and then we saw it kind of rear its head there. So yeah, I think those two do stand out, and I don't know if it necessarily would have been enough to swing the game, because I just felt like Texas's run game was so potent, and they were not going to have the right answers for that. I don't know. Did you think if those two plays went differently that it could have been a different outcome?
Yeah, I don't know. It would have been closer, but I mean, let's jump right there to the Texas run game, because it was obvious from most of the game, UTSA could not tackle Bijan. I mean, he was just a different type of athlete. It was taking 2 to 3 guys to try and get him down to the ground. And I think they just wore him down, or he just wore them down eventually, because you saw him break loose like in that second half for big ones.
Yeah, I had the stat in my story. Texas had 27 rushing yards in the first quarter. They had 91 at halftime, and then by the end of the game, they had 298. So, with each phase of the game, as they get a little bit more wear and tear on the UTSA defense and just continue to the physicality that not just Bijan, but also Roshan Johnson bring in that running game, it was just too much for UTSA's guys to handle. And, I think if against different running backs, UTSA is equipped to handle a wildcat type of offense or just a team that wants to ground and pound it. Like, I feel like UTSA would rather face that in a vacuum than a air raid passing game, like some of the things with Western Kentucky that gave them issues last year. I think there's still some of those questions against the pass, and if you want to line up and run it against them, that's probably what they prefer. But it's just different when you're against guys like Bijan and Roshan.
Right.
During the week, I was trying to figure out if there was anything they could do to try to prepare for this. And, we asked Jeff Traylor about it, and he said, you can't. Like, if you prepared for the kind of physicality that they bring, then you wouldn't have anybody healthy enough once the game rolled around. So they haven't seen this before, and they won't see it the rest of the year. And it's just something that kind of sets apart what Texas has and bringing in those 4 and 5 star guys from where UTSA is at the moment.
Were you surprised the way this game played out? Because certainly I thought that UTSA's offense would have trouble with Texas's defense, while the Roadrunner defense would sort of be able to hold the Longhorn run game almost a little bit in check, a little bit better. And we kind of saw the opposite of that play out.
Yeah, I think I was anticipating kind of a shootout. I don't know that he had thought either side was going to be able to contain the other. And it seemed like UTSA, on paper, their biggest advantage was their wide receivers against the Texas secondary, which was dealing with some injuries, and even at full strength doesn't seem like a strong point of that roster. And I think a lot of that got neutralized just because of the issues with UTSA's offensive line. And, we saw Demetrius Allen make his return and start at right tackle. And it was interesting to see him over there because it was the only position on the line that he didn't play last year when they moved him around quite a bit. But, probably for a new guy in Bentley Tafu at left tackle, just coming in here and kind of learning the system and how everything works, probably made sense to keep him where he is and then put Demetrius, who's a little bit more, he's learned a lot more and had some more experience in UTSA's program that he would be more comfortable sliding to the other side. And it all was a moot point anyway. I think he played 3 snaps and then he was out injured, and he probably played 2 snaps and was out injured because then he came back in for one more snap and tried to tough it out and had to go down injured again, unfortunately. So I don't know about the severity of that at this point, but it seems like the same thing we've been talking about, where you have Frankie Martinez, a walk-on, come in at right tackle with a newcomer and converted guard at left tackle. It's just going to be tough. And there were times, I think, Texas finished with, 1 sack and 5 tackles for loss. Like, it wasn't like they were necessarily wreaking havoc, but UTSA had to do so many different things to prevent that from happening. I mean, there were a lot of plays where you're looking at a running back and a tight end staying in on max protection. And there's a lot of plays where you're just having quick hitting passes that the ball's getting out of Frank's hands right away, or some kind of run play that tries to just get through the line as quickly as possible without trying to put those guys in a position to have to hold up. And there was even a play I saw where they did UTSA did like an Army style like cut block screen where all the guys dive at the defensive line's knees just to buy half a second for a screen pass to get off. So I think that you could see that, Jeff said after the game, they're not able to do the things that they want to do on offense. And I think that's very evident with some of the adjustments they have to make around that offensive line situation. And so that makes it difficult for them to keep pace on the scoreboard, even if it looks like a pretty productive approach a lot of times to be able to get those quick hitting passes going and even have a little bit of success in the run game, which I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, let's talk about the injuries, I guess, right now. It seemed like if there was one thing UTSA wanted from this game was to get out healthy. And I think we saw 3 offensive linemen go down at different points during this game. We don't know, like you mentioned, we don't know the severity, but obviously that's a position that's in question coming out of this game. And outside linebacker sounded like it's another position that may be hit moving forward. So what's your take on all the injuries here, Greg?
Yeah, so I want to start with the line. We talked about the tackle situation, and it was interesting because Ernesto Alvarez has been at least giving it a go the first 2 weeks, and he was dressed for this game, and I didn't notice any kind of extra wraps or bandages from my binocular view from the press box, but he didn't end up playing in this game unless I missed it. And then like you mentioned, Demetrius Allen's out, so that's probably the best case scenario for UTSA would be if you can get Ernesto Alvarez back, and we saw Mekhi Hart go down in the opener. If he can come back and they can plug him in, now you have a little bit more at tackle, at least better than what you've been working with these first couple weeks. And so that could salvage that situation. And as long as Kevin Davis is all right, which he seemed to be able to jog off on his own after a little bit of time down. So hopefully that's an encouraging sign after he kind of got rolled up on from behind. But if you have him and you have Maka at center and you have T. Haynes at the other guard position, you're pretty firm on the interior as long as you can get those tackles a little bit more healthy than where they are now. And, Jeff Traylor last week made it seem like maybe within a week or two, we could see that. So I don't know what exactly the timeline is on those guys, but it's sooner than later for the Roadrunners' sake, because it's been tough for them to hold up with the two that they have there, which is not to knock those guys. They're just either out of position or inexperienced, or, you can't ask a walk-on to play against, Jeff gave you the rundown yesterday.
Yeah.
The front of Houston is as tough as there is. Army's got a second round pick, Jeff said, at the outside linebacker defensive end spot there that's going one-on-one with him. And then you come against this Texas team and you know what kind of talent they bring to the table. So certainly this has been a difficult task for a walk-on at a school like UTSA, and he's held up as well as he can, but it's not going to lead to productive offense, unfortunately. That best isn't necessarily good enough in this case. And so you talked about linebacker. Well,
yeah.
Dadrian Taylor, I think, played like 5 snaps, maybe. Like he was injured pretty quickly, and then I didn't notice until halftime, but he had a sling on already before they even went into the locker room. So that was a pretty big loss. And then his brother Danye, I thought, had been playing pretty well. I remember, he was the guy I highlighted after the opener and did a story on, because it just seemed like he had made a lot of progress. And Jeff said he's hurt too, and then Pig Cage just got down it well. So what does that leave? Is it Malik Jones? Is that his name?
Yeah.
So, if I can't even remember, I tend to be pretty in the weeds on this roster. If I can't remember somebody's name, it probably means that they're getting into the real depths of it at that position. So it's going to be interesting to see how long those guys are out. And, the real scares, I think, were actually Frank Harris and Brendan Brady. And it turned out that, those were just Brady was a cramp, and Harris was either he got his bell rung a little bit or was just kind of more of a conservative decision because he was under so much pressure and the game was starting to get out of hand and there's more important games ahead. So, the fact that they came and talked to us in media after the game is all I need to know, that they're healthy. You don't see guys if they're not ready to go or they're not going to be playing down the line. So I wouldn't worry about either of those two, but it's those other positions that you really have to highlight. And you can just tell, late in the game, game might have still been within reach, but it was Frank Harris lined up back there with Kavorian Barnes and behind 2 inexperienced tackles. And it's like, this just isn't going to get it done on 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1 against this kind of defense.
Greg, what did you think about the atmosphere last night in Austin? Huge crowd, the biggest crowd the Roadrunners have ever played in front of. They did have some kind of miscues with a few penalties because of the noise, it seemed like. But overall, it seemed like the Roadrunners were able to, play on that stage pretty well.
Yeah, there was a false start. I think it was 1st and goal from. There was one that was a 1st and goal from the 1, and they had a false start or an illegal shift, and then there was a 1st and goal from the 4, I think, where something else happened.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wrong. One of them was a 4th and goal from the 1 because they were going to go
right.
for it, and
they kicked the field goal. Yeah.
So there was a couple of those that proved a little bit costly, but they were also. We talked about how they tried to pull out all the stops in this game, and we mentioned the surprise onside kick and the halfback pass. There was a really creative play where they motioned Oscar Cardenas across the formation, and he tucked in under center and took like a QB sneak to convert a 3rd and 2. So they were trying to pull out a lot of different stuff. And some of it that was less noticeable was, I think, formationally, they were lined up in ways that I haven't seen before. They would do like these 5 wide sets, but it would all be like tight to the line of scrimmage. They would have like 2 tight ends and a running back split out wide on certain plays, like just weird packages and formation groups that I think were designed to keep Texas off balance. And there's going to be some hiccups that come with that. There was one of these plays that they were flagged for having 5 guys in the backfield. I guess there was 3 out wide and none of them were lined up on the line. But it's like, it's not like it's Cephas and Franklin and JT out there. It's like a tight end and a running back, and like because they're just being so strange about what they're doing that those guys probably haven't been in that position so many times, and so you can get a mistake like that or two that slips in. And I think, if that's the worst thing that comes of trying to keep Texas off balance and find something that'll work for you, it's not the end of the world. But certainly I understand why for some fans that gets you riled up a little bit.
The overall showing for the Roadrunners against the Longhorns, for a lot of UTSA faithful, this game's kind of been the one they've been building to prove that they belong. And for a lot of Roadrunner people, it was a pretty proud moment yesterday for them just to play. We asked Coach Traylor about that, and he didn't want to even go there. He decided to use that as an opportunity to try and continue to get better. While some of the players, they weren't as broken up about the loss as they've been in previous losses. Well, what was your take on just the overall importance and the showing of how good UTSA looked on a grand stage last night?
Yeah, I think spirits were relatively high. It felt like, especially with the players. And an interesting thing that happens in a lot of these games is, weirdly, if a team loses by 7 points or less, then when they come to the media room, it's still very fresh. But if you lose by 20 and you had your backup quarterback in there for the last 10 minutes, you've already kind of gone through that like most disappointing period. And then you already have a little bit different perspective by the time you come talk to us. So I think we saw a lot of that where they were already able to kind of reflect on the high points of the game, and still, they all said that they came there expecting to win and that they thought they had enough to get it done, but they could still, smile and think about going up by 10 points and what that atmosphere was like, and kind of what it means for the future. And it was interesting to ask guys like Frank and Rashad, when you first started here, would this have even been a thought or a conversation? I mean, they signed this contract in May 2019, and you were going into Frank Wilson's last season. And I think a lot of people kind of knew how that was going to end, unless there was some kind of miracle that he was able to turn it around. And it felt 100% just like a payday. Like there was no expectation that the next coach was going to be all that different, and that this would ever be a reasonable expectation of competing in Austin against Texas, especially, who knew what direction that program was going to go. I don't think anybody at that time thought they would be coming off a 5-7 season, might look a little bit vulnerable in some ways. So it was like the perfect storm for this to become a competitive game. And I think that the players understood how much had to change for that to happen from where they were before. And of course, Jeff recognizes that as well, having been kind of the architect of a lot of that change. So I think that they do have a lot that they can come away feeling good about. And the thing that struck me the most, there was two of them from after the game. Jeff said that he felt like they proved they were built to last with this 3-game run that they went on this season so far. And being 1-2, that might not seem obvious, but to play against teams that tough, I mean, two of them who were ranked at the time, and then, Army being as difficult of a grueling kind of physical matchup that you're going to get on the road in that environment, it says a lot that they were able to play 2 overtime games and keep this one close for as long as they did. And I think Jeff's point was like, nobody is going to look at UTSA on a scoreboard or see them on their schedule and think, oh, it's going to be an easy game. They understand that UTSA is a program that is just as strong as they were last year, at least close, and is going to be formidable, hopefully, going into the future for their sake. I think that's kind of the idea. And, that just says a lot about how far they've come.
Yeah, I think I asked Jeff what he thought he learned about his team these first 3 games. We all know it's been a gauntlet of opponents, and he said nothing. He always knew who they were, that we got to learn or everybody else got to learn. So, UTSA is going to wrap up non-conference play next week against Texas Southern, and then I don't want to call it the real season, but the most important season for the Roadrunners. Yeah, district play starts in 2 weeks at Middle Tennessee. So, I mean, would you just, aside from the injuries, the Roadrunners got to be in a strong spot, headed into conference play, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so. And I don't think that the conference, I didn't look at a lot of the scores from this week, but what I had seen previously doesn't look all that formidable. I think there's a lot of games on the schedule that are going to be pretty easy, and it'll probably come down to that road game at UAB. And then even then, it might be a situation where if you lose that one, you still have a chance to play a rematch for the conference championship, probably back at that venue, given how much that win would mean. So yeah, I don't know. I think they're in a pretty good spot overall. And this is a good week to kind of get right hopefully from a physicality standpoint, from an injury standpoint for their sake. Texas Southern is not one of the top teams in the FCS. I think I was looking at the rankings trying to get a grasp of where Incarnate Word was. And when you go into these like advanced metrics ish, they're like about 100 out of 120, just in terms of their overall rating in the S&P plus out of all the FCS teams. So this is not going to be a particularly difficult test for them, even as FCS teams go. So presumably they can rest a lot of their guys and still come out with a pretty convincing win. But I don't think they're going to want to take them too lightly, because you never know. So it'll be interesting to see how they approach it, and who plays and who doesn't, and what that really means. But this is, hopefully it acts as the equivalent of an open week for them, so that they can kind of get everything back in order for conference play.
Greg, did we hit on everything? I think we got this puppy pretty wrapped up.
Well, we talked about the penalties on offense, but I think there was some conversation as well about on defense, and I don't know.
Offsides, right? There was one particular drive where their offsides jumped out.
Yeah. It was weird because Jamori Robinson just was standing like 2 yards offsides, and like nobody warned him. And, I don't know. But the one that stands out more than that, I think that penalty got declined anyway. The one that stands out more than that was Corey Mayfield jumped offsides on the 4th and 4. And, I think Jeff talked about after the game, it was interesting because this was kind of the sense that I had watching it. It's just when they're going to play with so much energy and enthusiasm, sometimes it just boils over into some ways that look undisciplined. And I don't want to give them a free pass for everything, but at the end of the game, I think they had 45 yards of penalties. Like, we can't sound too many alarms for that. I know it struck a lot of people the wrong way, and there's some things to be concerned about there, but I don't think that single-handedly lost them the game. So I just wanted to address it, since it's been kind of a talking point. And I think if that's the product of how they play, it's not like if he doesn't jump off sides, they're guaranteed to get the stop anyway. Maybe Texas converts that 4th and 4. So I don't think that was necessarily the game changer that everybody at the time thought it is. And it's just an easy thing for fans to harp on when they're passionate and in the moment, to say, I wish they could have fixed this, because it feels so obvious and easy, right? But I think there's just some of these things that are going to happen. Like when the people this was even a lot of the Texas media are like, UTSA is going to be kicking themselves for certain mistakes, or feeling like they let this game slip away or whatever. And it's like, I guess if they had 0 penalties and Frank Harris played the absolute best game of his life and all these other things went right, then they could have won. But that's a pretty high standard to hold anybody else to. I think they were, in a lot of ways, just kind of outclassed more than they should just beat themselves up over how this went. I don't know if you had the same kind of read coming away.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not here to kill the Roadrunners for being an undisciplined team because they have X amount of penalties. You have to there weren't any holding penalties, were there? I mean,
right. And that was the huge.
I mean, there were, look what they did last week against Army, and how they were able to clean that up from this week to last week. Those are the kind of things I think you take a look at to see where you're at as a disciplined team or not. Some of the stats kind of don't tell the truth in this situation, but
I was going to say, even holding to me is like, when you're an offensive tackle and you pick up a holding penalty, it's a product of being overmatched a lot of times.
Yeah.
And so it's like you basically prevent a sack. You're kind of trading it. And maybe you would rather have 1st and 20 than 2nd and 18 or whatever. So I don't even know if that's discipline. It's like, but do they have any, personal fouls and things like that? I feel like we've had very limited, if any, especially, I know I'm highly confident there was none of that yesterday. So that's the stuff that I really think about with discipline, or, like kicking the ball out of bounds and stuff like that. These are the things that I don't think they struggle with. So I don't know that to be too critical of the discipline is warranted.
It also seemed like they cleaned up, and it's hard to watch live, but a lot of and maybe this is just a product of getting more reps, but a lot of the substitution errors, or maybe confusion due to, different personnel packages, it seemed like they've gotten a little bit more crisp on that.
Certainly on defense, because I don't think they had to burn any timeouts for it. We talked about some of the issues on offense, but I think, I would be interested to, I don't know if we can ever get a candid answer on this, but it felt like the amount of different things that they tried with their personnel and the packages and the groupings on offense was almost unprecedented. Because you see them try a lot of different things each week, but the amount of different combinations of personnel, whether it's 2 tight ends, which I really didn't think they'd play that much 2 tight end, because I just don't think that that's their most talented grouping.
They were, though. They ran them out there.
We're both out there quite a bit, and it might not have even been that easy to notice, because they're, like I said, they're like split out wide half the time, and they're just putting certain guys in positions you wouldn't expect them in. It was like they thought they could maybe throw a screen out there and have some blocking advantages because it's a running back and 2 tight ends. But the point being, to try as much weird stuff as they tried and not have more issues, I thought was fine. The fact that they had the one substitution, and then, I don't even know. I'm not going to pretend I'm some expert on the illegal shift rules, but I guess there was one play where there was two guys in motion. That was the one that wiped out the touchdown to Cephas, I think. And I guess it was two guys in motion at the snap, and they didn't come set again. I didn't see a replay, and I don't know the rules specifically. I'll take the ref's word for it. But, those things are very minor. And I think to be trying as many things as they were and have that happen, like, I don't think against Texas Southern you're going to see that. I think they can play. I think you're going to see what it looks like when they can just play something that they're confident in and know that it's going to get results and not have to worry about facing a matchup of superior talent.
Greg, to wrap up, how good is this Roadrunner team? Jeff said he felt like, they might be better than last year's team, and you look at how they've performed, the 1-2 record against very difficult non-conference opponents so far. It seems like this team has a chance to be as good as they were last season.
Yeah, but isn't it great? I'm probably different from a lot of people on this, but isn't it great that we get to know? Like last year they were 11-0, and it was like, I have no idea how they would do against Texas or against Houston or at Army, against tests like that. And certainly Memphis was a difficult game, and they proved they could come back. And Illinois, being in that environment is less than ideal, even if that wasn't the strongest team at the end of the year. But it still felt like we were coming through the year with those questions because they hadn't been able to play somebody better.
Every week we had those questions.
And I actually really enjoy, they have already as many losses as last season, but I feel like at least we have a better barometer on the strength of this team. And it's still a pretty encouraging thing. I don't know if I would say that they're as good as last year's team. I think just talent for talent, to lose Clarence Hicks and Charles Wiley and Tariq Woolen and Spencer Burford, especially given the replacements at some of those positions, like on offensive line, the drop off from Spencer Burford has been immense through no fault of those guys, just because of injuries and things like that. So, it's hard to say that this team is as good as last year's because of the talent gap. There's obviously a lot of returners who might be a year better, and so that could offset some of that. But generally, I think that, they're still a pretty strong team. I don't think we're going to see them break into the top 25. Very hard to do when you're a Conference USA team with 2 losses, but they could easily run the table in this league. And maybe the more accurate projection would probably be 1 loss somewhere along the way, whether that's UAB or some other thing that trips them up. But I think they've proven that they are on the route to be able to contend with a lot of these teams if they can continue to build forward, and certainly among the strongest teams in Conference USA. And even if it took 2 losses to prove it, I feel like we have a much better game than we did last year when there was a lot of unknowns. So I prefer that they're playing these kind of teams. It makes it easier for me, I feel like.
Well, I think that'll wrap it up this week, Greg. The Roadrunners have a good showing against Texas, but fall short, 41-20. Up next is a non-conference closer against Texas Southern. We'll see how that goes, and we'll catch you guys next week at the Alamo Dome. JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports, Greg Lucas, San Antonio Express News. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks.